You're muted, Zviad.
Yeah, I got it. Okay, good talk. Sorry about the delay. Okay, welcome back. Hopefully we'll finish Hilchos Bishul tonight, Be'ezus Hashem. And I would like to figure out a way to send out my notes to everybody so that they could have what I'm basing it on. Also see if there's mistakes in my notes or differences from what I said. But I'm not sure exactly how to go about doing that. But okay, whatever. I'll have to figure that out. So hopefully we'll finish Hilchos Bishul. If there's anything that I haven't covered, then please post it or text me privately, and then maybe I can continue it next week. Be'ezus Hashem. Okay, so basically we are going to. I think what we left off with was we were supposed to discuss how to add water to a cholent on Shabbos. Meaning, if the cholent's burning, seems to be a common issue. If the cholent is burning, so then how do you add hot water to it? That would be one subject for tonight. And then also how to properly use a blech will be another subject. And how to properly use ovens, meaning open the oven door, taking food out. I think those are the three subjects that we haven't covered yet. Okay, so first, adding water to a cholent that's burning. So there's a few requirements that are necessary before we can even start with whether you're allowed to add the hot water. First is that the cholent has to be on a blech. Meaning, if it's in a crock pot, then you have to line the crock pot with silver foil, or like we said, parchment paper, or whatever it is that you do. If it's not on a blech, then you're not allowed to add hot water to the cholent. And that's simply because when you're taking the hot water, then you're taking the hot water from one source, you're putting it back. It's doing chazorah, right? We said that you're not allowed to take something from a heat source and put it back on top of something that's on a heat source if it's not covered. So if your cholent does not have a blech, then you're not allowed to add hot water. That's first. Second of all is that the water has to have been boiled. The chatchila, it really has to be boiled to be yotze all the opinions. And boiled is 220, right? 212, whatever it is. Whatever they boiled. It has to reach boiling point, which a lot of urns, which is the place that most people add the hot water from, a lot of urns do not get to boiling. They'll get to 160, 180, in which case you really should not take hot water from an urn and add it to a cholent. So really, it would have to come from a pot that's on a fire, or if you know that you boiled your water before Shabbos and then you added it to the urn, then you know it's already boiled. Right, once it was boiled, and as long as the hot water is warmer than room temperature, figure about 100 degrees would be best, then you would be able to add it into the cholent. So again, those are the two requirements that you need first. You need to have a blech, and you need to have the water boiled at least once, and then it has to be warm. And then the poskim say that there's two ways that you're able to add hot water. Okay? The first and most preferred way is if you take the cholent off the fire, right? You take the cholent off the fire or off the crock pot, you put it under the urn, and then you add hot water straight from the urn into the crock pot. Okay, that's the most preferred way, because that means that the water is going straight in without using a cup in the middle. What you have to be careful with is lechatchila, you want to make sure that the cholent pot is not right under the urn. Because if it's right under the urn, then the smoke or the steam from the cholent is going to go up into the urn, and it's going to make your urn fleishiks. That's lechatchila though. B'di'evid, even if you did this, your urn will not become fleishiks. But there are opinions that say that, so therefore it's a problem. Right? So, meaning lechatchila, it's a problem. Again, I get this shaila a lot. First of all, the steam coming out of a pot, it's only very hot. Let's just use this soda can as an example, even though I'm sitting in a kitchen purposely to be able to show things. But for time-wise, things that are not strictly necessary to show. So I'm going to try not to show it. But let's say this would be my pot of cholent. If you experiment with your own cholent, excuse me, and you take the cover off the pot, you can pretty much keep here. I would imagine here you definitely could keep your hand. It's not going to burn. It's only like right here, maybe it gets very hot. It has to be very, very close, which in almost all scenarios, when you put your pot right under the urn, right under the spout of the urn, unless it's really, really close, this is not going to be an issue anyways, right? So therefore, but to be safe, just make sure there's a little bit of space in between. And again, anything less than 110 degrees is not going to make any transfer of taste anyways. So if you know that you can keep your hand here, then you know that that's far enough away from the spout of the urn. So again, I would say in almost all scenarios, you're not going to be keeping your cholent pot that close to the spout of the urn anyways. But to be safe, just make sure there is a little bit of space, and you're not putting it straight up into the urn. But if you did do this, then it's still going to be okay. It's not going to make it flacious. This is a common question people ask, especially over the winter vacation. That was one of the big shilas. Can you use an urn in a dining room of a hotel, or the hotels that have breakfast? So people are taking the non-kosher coffees and they're putting it under the water and they're letting the water in. In almost all scenarios, the smoke, the steam that comes up is not hot enough. And if it's not hot, it will not make the spouts tray and b'di'evid. Anyways, it's going to be okay. It's just a lechatchila din. A lot of people get nervous from it. There's no reason to get nervous from it. But again, to be safe, just make sure that you keep the cholent pot a little bit removed. Okay, so that's the first way. Again, the first way is to take your cholent pot off the fire, again with a blech, and you put it under the spout from the urn. The urn has to have been boiled first. You put in the water, you don't mix it, and then you put it back onto the cholent pot. That's the first way. So now if cholent sprays up, somebody just posted the question. If cholent sprays up when the water hits it, then it would really depend on how hot. If it's boiling hot and that water then jumps up and sprays and splatters onto the urn, then it's a complicated question. If it goes onto the outside of the urn where there's water, then really it's no problem, because there's going to be 60 times more water in the urn. But if it goes onto the spout, then I would tell you, to be safe, after Shabbos, well, wait 24 hours and then pour hot water over the spout of the urn, and that will kosher it. That's what I would tell you to be safe. Plastic can be koshered. Another thing that people get confused with. We don't kosher plastic for Pesach, but for all year round, we do kosher plastic. Some even kosher plastic for Pesach, but for all year round, we do kosher plastic. So if theoretically it splatters up, then I would say that's what you should do. But that's only if the cholent splatters. If the water that hit the cholent splattered up, then I would say that you don't have to do anything. But if you're not sure and you're afraid that it's going to splatter, so then you should try and do it slowly. Try and do it. Don't open up the spout quickly. Just and do two things: either open the spout a little bit, so only a little bit of water comes out, so it doesn't splash, or just lower the cholent pot even lower, so that it's not going to splatter up so high. Okay, so that's one. Two is if you can't do this for whatever reason. Let's say you don't have anybody to help you. And to meaning you got to hold the cholent pot. You need two people for this, right? Because you're holding the cholent pot, and then you got to have somebody open the spout. Or you can lean it on something, and then it's complicated. It's usually you need two people. If it's one person by themselves, it's very difficult to do. Or if the cholent's very heavy, so the other option is to take the hot water from the urn, put it into a cup, and then bring the cup over to the cholent and put it in that way. That is also okay. Not as preferable as taking the cholent pot out, but if you're by yourself, then you can do this, or it's too heavy, then you can do the cup. Again, just to review, the best way to do it is to pick the cholent pot up. If it has a blech, bring it over to the urn, keep it lower from the urn, and then put in the water. And the second best way is to put it into a cup and then bring it over to the cholent pot and put it in that way. Okay, so that's adding hot water. Now using a blech. So as we said, using a blech for shehiyah, which is cooking up your food on Friday night, as long as the food is fully cooked, you really don't need a blech. We do it anyways to be strict. So you can keep the food on the blech wherever you want, and in the hot parts of the blech, the not hot part, whatever it is, that's fine, because the whole thing is a chumrah. When you want to put the food back on, onto the blech, meaning you take soup Friday night, and you want to put the soup back on to stay hot, or cholent Friday night, or Shabbos morning, and you want to put it, back onto the blech, right? So again, you need 5 requirements. In order to put food back on, you need 5 requirements. First is that the fire has to be covered. So that you obviously have because you have a blech. The food has to be fully cooked, right? If the food's not fully cooked, then you can never put it back on. The food still has to be warm, and you have to have in your head that you're putting it back onto the fire, and it shouldn't be out of your hands, right? Those are the 5. That's just a quick review of the 5 requirements in order to put something back straight onto a blech. Now, a blech really has there's 3 parts of a blech. Now, I asked my mother that she should leave on the blech from Shabbos, and she did with the soup from Friday night. So I'm going to try and I hope just somebody let me know if you can't see it clearly. Cool. Sorry. Okay, so here's the blech, right? Obviously, this blech does not have the one that covers the handles, but okay, we said that's a chumrah, so that's not necessary, right? So this blech, there's one fire on. There is one fire on this blech, and it's right. So there's the soup that's been sitting there since Friday night. I just can't. Maybe I can hold on a second and get somebody maybe to hold this. Okay, we have a volunteer. I don't know if you'll be able to see. Hold on, go over there.
I can't see myself.
That's fine. Okay, so here we have the blech. The fire's on the back left. The rest of the blech it has different levels of hot. So basically there's 3 sections to the blech. You have the first one, which is right over the fire, which is extremely hot. That's one. That's section 1. Section 2 is next to the blech, which is yad saledas, meaning you can't keep your hand there. We don't particularly care about the hand. What we wanted to do is we want to make sure that it can keep the food to yad saledas. Meaning if I would put cold food straight on here, would it be able to get that food to yad saledas? That would be section 2. So this is right on top of the fire is section 1. Section 2 is that it's hot, but not nearly as hot as on top of the fire. And then section 3 is right here, which is actually not so far because this is it's on low. Well, it's on 3/4. So really, depending on how hot you make your fire or how many fires you put on, that's going to be how far this stretches. But right here, this is section 3. That's pretty hot, but that's, again, section 3 is where that will not get food to yad saledas. It will not get food to 110 degrees. So if I can keep my hand here, and I'm pretty sensitive to heat, I imagine most people can keep it here for longer. Right, this will definitely, right here, will not get food to 110 degrees. I would even say here it wouldn't. As you get closer to the fire, depending on how high the flame is, that's where that's going to be. So again, to repeat, section 1 is right on top of the flame. Section 2 is next to it, which is hotter than 110 degrees. And section 3 is right here. Okay, so let's start with the simplest first. Section 3 is considered not on top of the fire. So you can take food straight out of the refrigerator, put it here, 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 anywhere, as long as it will not get the food to 110 degrees, which means that's pretty hot. Not that this should be 110 degrees. It has to be that this, put it in a pot, like we have this food right here. You put it here. Well, you know what? This food has been sitting here for a couple of hours, and it's not even close to 110 degrees. So therefore, you'd be able to take any food out of the refrigerator, put it straight onto here. You don't have to do any of the rules of chazara as long as the food was pre-cooked. Liquids too, because a liquid will not get to 110 degrees. You could put it here too, and then you'll have a pretty nice warm liquid to make poppers or whatever it is, tea. No problem, straight out of the refrigerator as long as that liquid was pre-cooked. Okay? So that's the easiest. That's the section 3. That's not even considered ala ish. This is the equivalent of putting it down on top of a pot, on top of a crock pot. It's nothing. Okay? Section 3, no problem. Section 1 is where, section 1 is if you want to put the food back on, you have to have all the dinam of hazara, which is basically this is soup, right? I have to take it off, put it down, wherever it is, put it down on the counter. If I'm with somebody, obviously it's better to have somebody else hold it. If not, I keep my hand. Second best would be to balance it. So I'm actually doing something. I take out the soup and I can put it back. Right? And I can keep the soup off for as long as I can, as long as I want, as long as my hand is still on here or somebody else is holding it, I put it back even right here. No problem. All right? That's also, so that's pretty straightforward. Again, section 3, which is where it doesn't get to Yad Saledes, you can put it where you can pick anything you want, put it down. Section 1 is considered like fire, it's just covered. So it says it's covered, you're allowed to put the food right back on. Section 2, which in this case, because the fire is on low, is only right around here, is sort of no man's land. So what you can do is, and we discussed this once before, that there's a chumrah not to take food straight out of the pot, which, like we said, again, I want to reiterate it, that's a chumrah, that is not a halacha. I mean, it's halacha that comes from a chumrah, and we said you could be mekel if necessary, if there's nobody around. But there's a very simple eitzah. What you can do is you can push it to right here, right? It's no longer on the fire. You can take it out, scoop out whatever you want, and then put it back, right? Because this is considered on the fire, but not mamish on the fire. So therefore, you're allowed to scoop out straight from the pot and then put it right back. This is the equivalent of me holding it, right? The question becomes, and this is where we have a little bit of a disagreement in the poskim, is can I push this pot to here and then scoop out? So it seems like according to Rav Feinstein, which we can rely on, because we're in America and we can rely on Rav Moshe, we rely pretty much on his psukim for bless. So Rav Moshe says, if this was here from before Shabbos, then you're allowed to take it, even all the way this far, take it off, and then push it back, right? Others say you're not allowed to do that because since we already looked at this as if it's no longer on the fire, because you're allowed to take things out of the refrigerator and put it down over here. So how can you push it back here? It's no longer considered on the fire. So some disagree with that. But bottom line is we can rely on those opinions that say that you're allowed to do this. What you're not allowed to do is to take something out of the refrigerator, put it here, and then later transfer it to here. That would not be allowed according to all opinions because this is coming from the fridge. You're putting it here. It's only if the pot started out before Shabbos over here. So then some say, and we can rely on this, is you can push it all the way over here, and then you can take it out and push it back. Or if you wanted to get something a little warmer, to put it close to here where it won't get Yad Saledes, but you want to put it partially here, so you don't have any room on the blech, so you would move it off. But I don't think it's so necessary to do that because you can just move it to the part that's Yad Saledes, right, which will keep the food Yad Saledes, and then take out the soup and then put it back. Okay, so just to review, 3 sections of a blech. You have one that's right on the fire. That's considered ala eish, even though it's covered. So there, that you're allowed to, as long as you take the pot off, right? You take the pot off, you take out your soup, put it down, whatever it is, and then put it back on there, no problem. The middle is considered not on the fire, but it's on the fire enough that you don't have to do all the chazor of holding it, etc., etc. So you can just move it over, take out the soup, and push it right back. You don't need any complicated procedures, somebody holding it, somebody helping you. The third section, which is in this case most of this blech, then you could even take something out of the refrigerator and put it down. That's basically the blech use. Okay. Okay, so that's that for blech, and now I'll need you back in a few minutes. Okay. Let me just see if there's any questions. I hope that was clear. Let me just see if there was any questions on that. Okay, so I'm going to go backwards based. If anybody has any questions on the blech, please post them. Please post them now. Yeah, no, if your food will get to Yad Zeledes after a few hours, you still cannot put it there. I mean, there are opinions that say you can, but you should not. You should not put it there because we're afraid you're going to forget about it. So the food is going to get to Yad Zeledes, then that's considered like on the fire. And if you took it out of the fridge, then you cannot put it there. Even if it's going to take 12 hours to get to Yad Zeledes, then it's a problem, right? Okay, if food was baked but not cooked, can it be put on section 3 of the blech? That's an excellent question, because what we're worried about is Bishul Acharafiyah, right? But yes, in this case, if it was baked and not cooked, then you can. It's more of a question if it was cooked and then you're putting it on the fire, because there you're not cooking with any sort of liquid. That would be more of the issue. But again, if it's section 3, it's not an issue. Section 3 is not Yad Zeledes. So since it's not Yad Zeledes, there's no issue with anything less than 110 degrees is meaningless in halacha, for kashrus and for Shabbos. So since it's going to be less than 110, then you could put whatever you want, including liquids. Liquids can go there as long, and you have to know your blech, because depending on how many fires are on, if you put all 4 fires on, which I think would probably be dangerous, I don't think anybody does that. But on this particular blech that we just had, which we just showed, there was only 1 fire on at, I think, 3/4. So therefore, most of the blech was perfectly fine. But if you're going to leave it on full flame, or a second one on full flame, then you're going to have much more of an area that's going to be Yad Zeledes. But the point is anything less than Yad Zeledes is meaningless. So therefore, again, there's so much misunderstanding out there with this halacha. Anything that will not get to 110 degrees is meaningless for halacha for Shabbos. And therefore, you're allowed to take liquid out of the fridge, etc., and put it there. Okay? Okay, so I hope that's clear. Okay, so now we're going to discuss the overturned pan in a minute. I just wanted to get these questions out of the way. Okay, so going back to the cholent, adding the water, I see there's a question here. When you put water into cholent from a cup, do you need to take the cholent off the flame? You do not have to take the cholent off the flame. There are those that say that you have to, but you don't have to, because some say that that's considered mixing. But you should pour it in very slowly, not very fast. If you do it slow, then it's not a problem. Is it better to use the pot cover to transfer the water from the urn to the pot? I don't think it makes a difference. Anyway, is fine. Okay, fine. Okay, so that's that. Now, putting food on top of a pot. So we discussed already that a cholent pot or a crock pot, you're allowed to take food out of the refrigerator and put it on there. Right? Now, this was discussed 2 weeks ago. Can you take food and put it down on top of a pot? So yes, you're allowed to take food and put it on top of a pot, but that pot has to have food in it. Right? L'chatchila, that pot has to have food in it. Right? But what about putting it down on top of an empty pot? Now, when would that apply? That would be taking a 9x13 and putting it down on top of, putting it upside down. Can you then take food from the refrigerator and put it on top of your blech? Yeah. Okay. So that basically, I see. There is a machlokes whether an empty pot you're allowed to. Okay. There's a machlokes about that. So therefore, it's better not to use the upside down pan if the food is going to get to Yad Seledes, right? So it's. But the bottom line is there are many makilim. So the truth is, you are allowed to. We paskin that you're allowed to, especially on a belech, meaning using an empty pot to put on a fire, which will probably ruin the pot. Let's say you have an empty pot on the fire. That's where most of the disagreement is. But if you put the empty pot on top of a blech, so then that's already twice removed from the fire. There, many poskim say that that's allowed. So therefore, you can be lenient and you could do that. Although there are those that disagree. So you may go to somebody's house and see, or somebody comes to your house and you're doing it, and they say, "Oh, how can you do that?" There's a disagreement about it, but the bottom line is you can rely on that. Now, I personally don't think that if you take an upside down pan and put it down on top of the fire, that it's going to get much hotter than if you put it on the blech in section 3, like we've been discussing. But I guess that would depend on how hot the fire is. So basically, to answer the question, you can take an upside down pan and put it down on top of a blech, and then you can take food straight out of the fridge and even put it onto section 1. Okay, I don't know if I have to show that, but I think it's fairly straightforward. I should have shown it before, but that's, again, if you want to put an upside down pan on top of a blech, not on top of the fire straight. On top of the fire straight, you're not allowed to. If you take an upside down 9x13 tin or whatever you call it, put it down on top of the blech, we will be mako. I just noticed a 9. Yeah, it doesn't 9x13. I'm just saying 9x13 because that's a cookie sheet would also have to be something that has some space to it. A cookie sheet would also have space to it. Okay, so again, you could be mako like that. Although there are some that are mach. On top of a hot plate is certainly much more lenient because there are many that say, like we discussed a few weeks ago, many say that a hot plate you can take straight out of the fridge and always put it on. So if you have an upside down pan on top of a hot plate, then you certainly can, for sure, you can rely on those opinions that say that you're allowed to put it straight from the refrigerator on top of those pans. Okay? Can you put congealed gravy that will become liquid onto section 3? That's an issue having nothing to do with the blech. There's an isser of taking congealed gravy and making it into a liquid. If it's part of food, meaning, I think we discussed this, but if let's say you had a sesame chicken, that some of the gravy congealed, so then that would be okay because it goes straight into the chicken, so it mixes in all together, right? But if it's straight congealed gravy, making it into liquid, then that you're not allowed to do, having nothing to do with cooking. It can be milet, it could be noilet. You're creating something new. You're creating something that's congealed, and now you're creating it liquid. So therefore, that's a problem out to that. What I would tell you to do is if Friday night, I think this is the normal case. If Friday night you serve the food and then it congeals, if you put it in the refrigerator, what I would tell you to do is just leave it on the blech. Leave it on the blech the whole time, and then that will make sure that it doesn't congeal. I don't know if that's possible. Again, I don't usually spend time in the kitchen. I mean, I spend time in the kitchen. Usually it's eating, not preparing. So I may not know what I'm talking about. I hope the halacha part I know what I'm talking about, but the preparing part, I certainly do not know what I'm talking about. But I'm just trying to give eitzes of exactly what to do. Another question here. If you pour water into the pot, adding to the cholent, it's on the flame, it's not a problem because that water was already cooked. Again, like we discussed, the water has to have been boiled before, right? So therefore, since it was already cooked, you're not cooking it any further, so therefore it's not a problem. Okay, now something that I want to discuss before I go to the next thing is what about taking a hot plate, putting it on a Shabbos clock? Unfortunately, a number of years ago when that family had a big tzara in Brooklyn on Shabbos from the from the hot plate that went on fire. So a lot of people got scared to keep the hot plates on overnight. So the question is, what can I put my hot plate on a Shabbos clock, and it turns on Shabbos morning, and then I put the food on there. Now, the Svara would say, why not? Why can't I do that? If I put my air conditioner on the Shabbos clock, so why can't I put my hot plate and or crock pot, or even put coffee? This is a common question. People want to make coffee in a coffee maker, and they put on a timer, 10 o'clock in the morning, and makes them a nice fresh brewed coffee. And can that be done? The poskim, for the most part, say that it's not allowed to be done because it's too similar to cooking. So therefore, they do not allow you to put on crock pots, hot plates, coffee makers on the Shabbos clock. But there is a way that they do allow it, and that is if you put the food on there before Shabbos, and the food is fully cooked, and you leave it on there from before Shabbos, then you could put the crock pot or the hot plate on a Shabbos clock. Meaning, so I don't know which foods will get spoiled and which wouldn't if it sits out a whole night without any electricity, without any heat coming from the hot plate. But let's say a kugel. I'm assuming a kugel doesn't spoil if it's already fully cooked, and you want it to just be hot Shabbos morning, but you don't want to leave it on. You want to put on you just want it to get hot. So then, if you leave the kugel on overnight, then it would be okay. Another eitzah is if you're afraid that you don't want it to be on, you want it to go on and off. So that's also a way to do it. You can basically, I know some people that do this. What they do is they set the Shabbos clock to go on for an hour, then off for an hour, then on for an hour, so the food stays warm and the food stays on there, so the food doesn't get ruined, and then the hot plate is not on for too long. And I'm assuming, I don't know, you have to speak to an electrician, that's safer. So again, the psak that most places can say is that a hot plate crock pot should not be put on the Shabbos clock unless the food stays on there from before Shabbos. There are extenuating circumstances which places would be lenient with, so then ask if it's necessary. There are some, there are some that are more lenient. If you take a 9x13 pan and you put it on top of the crock pot, so then it looks much less like you're cooking. The reason why the places don't like this, even though they allow Shabbos clocks on air conditioners, et cetera, that's because it's just too similar to the cooking process. So they didn't want any sort of confusion with it. So therefore, they didn't let that. To shut it off is allowed. That according to all poskim, I don't say all poskim, Moshe Feinstein maybe would not allow it because he doesn't like Shabbos clocks at all, but that's not the accepted way we go with. But yes, if you want to have your crock pot shut off, let's say it's a 3-day Yom Tov, which Be'ez Hashem we're having by Pesach, or you want you're eating home Friday night and not Shabbos day, and you want your hot plate to go off, then going off is no problem. Because going off, there's no concern of it doesn't look like cooking and it's not similar to cooking. Fine. Yeah. Yes. Now, the Kedei Blech, I didn't want to discuss it, but since somebody asked, so we'll discuss it. Kedei Blech was basically somebody had a brilliant solution, and that was, since you're allowed to put food down on top of a pot that's on top of a fire, so why don't we create a blech that has a reservoir in it? Basically, it's your regular blech, and it's about this thick, and you put water in there. So then the blech is looked at like a pot, right? And then you could take anything out of the refrigerator, put it down on top of this blech, because that's putting it down on top of a pot, which is on top of the fire. To which, as far as I know, almost all poskim rejected this leniency, and they said it's just not, even though it's not what the point of putting food on top of a pot is that it doesn't look like anything like cooking. But here, by doing it this way, then it's basically taking away the whole point of the blech, or the whole point of putting food down on top. So that's why you pretty much don't see these kedera blocks anymore. That's because most poskim didn't like it at all. Okay, so that's basically that. Fine. Now the last subject is taking the food and putting it inside the oven and leaving it on. Very good question. Okay, somebody texted that. Thank you. Yom Tif is not an issue. Since Yom Tif we're allowed to cook, Yom Tif you could have hot plates, crock pots, coffee makers can all be turned on Shabbos clocks. It's not an issue. This is only an issue on Shabbos. On Yom Tif, I would actually say it's probably a smart idea to put on Yom Tif to put things on Shabbos clocks to turn on, off, whatever it is that you need to do. It's only an issue on Shabbos, again, because of the similarities of Shabbos. Okay, now, ovens. So what many people do, including in my family, is that we leave all the food in the oven on Friday night, including the soup. And what the thing is, how do you go about keeping food hot and opening the door, not opening the door because it's going to cause the flame to turn on? Okay, so now let's take a step back here. I don't know if we should do the background. It might be confusing. It may not be confusing. Basically, a refrigerator, as far as I know, I imagine most people on this Zoom here open up refrigerators without any sort of issues. The question is why? Why do we open a refrigerator door? When you open the refrigerator door, you're letting in hot air, which will then make the refrigerator turn on to maintain its temperature. I mean, the way a refrigerator works is that it cycles on and off. Let's say it's set for a temperature of 40 degrees. So when it hits 40 degrees, the refrigerator shuts off. Then it cools off, and then it gets hotter, and it'll turn back on, let's say every 10, 15 minutes, depending on how well insulated your refrigerator is and depending on how hot it is in your kitchen, right? So, but we paskin that you can open a refrigerator door at any time you want, even though it may let in hot air and your refrigerator is going to turn on. So that's a big discussion in the paskin why that's allowed. So basically, there's two things that you have to have in mind here with when it's allowed. It's psik reisha and grama. So psik reisha is basically, it's something unintended. So the phrase is psik reisha v'lo yomos, is, are you going to cut off the head of a chicken and it won't die? Of course it's going to die. Meaning back then, what they used for toys were chicken heads. So if a kid wanted a chicken head on Shabbos, so let's say you decided to chicken's head, which by itself would be not an issue on Shabbos, but the problem is it's going to die, which that's a problem. That's shchita, which is an isser on Shabbos. But that's not what you'd be very happy if the chicken walked around headless and alive on Shabbos. You do not intend to kill the chicken. Problem is that's an automatic outcome from taking off a chicken's head. That's psik reisha. Are you going to cut off its head, lo yomos, and it's not going to die? Right, so the same thing, when you have a malacha on Shabbos that's unintended, but it's going to automatically happen, that's called, it's the name for it is called psik reisha. It's a short for psik reisha v'lo yomos, and it's not going to die. So that's why if you have a refrigerator door where the light's going to turn on, that is your intention is not to turn on the light. Your intention is to open the door. That's called a psik reisha, right? And it's an automatic. Since it's an automatic, you're not allowed to do that on Shabbos. Just an interesting fact, an interesting halacha to know, and it could come in fairly often. Let's say you did forget your refrigerator light on, or you're in a hotel for Shabbos and you didn't realize that the refrigerator had the lights on. Psik reisha for a guy is allowed. It's a 100% allowed to ask a guy to open up your refrigerator door on Shabbos, even though you know that the light's going to turn on. A yid can't do it, but a guy is allowed to do it. If you get something in your car, you need to get it out. That's a psik reisha. All you're doing is opening the door to your car, and then it'll happen to open up a light. We're not allowed to do it because it's an automatic that the light's going to turn on. So therefore, you're not allowed to do it. But you can ask a guy without a question, straight up. You can say to the guy, please open my refrigerator door. There's a light on, and it's allowed. Okay, and then you'd have the guy unscrew the light bulb, and then you'd be fine. Okay, but we're talking about where you remember to shut off your light in the fridge, but can you open up the refrigerator door to get anything out when you're letting in hot air? And that's going to definitely cause the refrigerator to turn on earlier. It may turn on immediately. It may turn on in 5 minutes, 10 minutes. But the thing is, since we don't know, not a psik ratio. When you open the door and the light turns on, that's an automatic. That's a psik ratio. That's not allowed. If not a psik ratio, we paskin that it is allowed. There's obviously a lot more complicated things to it, but that's the basics of it. So therefore, we open the refrigerator door because we have no idea. Sometimes I'll open my refrigerator door and I'll leave it open for a few minutes, and it won't turn on, and it won't, and then I'll hear it turn on 10 minutes later. So that's a psik ratio, and it's also what's called garama. Garama means it's indirect, right? So since it's indirect, meaning you're not turning anything on, when you're letting in the hot air is going into the refrigerator. Then that hot air is tripping the thermostat, and then that thermostat is telling the refrigerator to turn on. So it's very far removed. The combination of those two reasons, you're allowed to open up a refrigerator door whenever you want. The question is, does this same halacha apply to oven doors? And the answer is that most places can say this does not apply to oven doors. And the main reason for that is because ovens are much more sensitive to cold air coming in. Now, it's obviously the opposite of refrigerator. Refrigerator, you're allowing in hot air. An oven door, you're allowing in cold air, right? So basically the way an oven works is, let's say you set it for 200 degrees or 300 degrees. Basically it hits 300 and then it cools off, it shuts off. Then when the cold air comes in, or when it just gets cool because there's no fire on, it drops below 300 degrees and the cycle goes on. You're going to let in a lot of cold air, and it's going to be much more immediate for the cold air to turn on the fire. So that's why we have much more of an issue with ovens than we have with refrigerators. Also, refrigerators are a d'Rabbanan. Turning on a fire is a d'Oraisa. We also have that, so that's one issue with opening the oven. The other issue is that even once you open the oven door, so now the fire turned on, because by shutting it, you're going to stop the cold air from coming in, and that will eventually cause the fire to shut off. So now you're causing all these things to happen on Shabbos. Okay, so that's the basic reason why ovens are much more complicated than refrigerators. So basically, there's two ways that the poskim deal with how to go about in an oven. Now, you want to know the best way, which may not necessarily work. The best way is, let's say this week, so Shabbos in New York started at, Shkia was about 10 after 5, right? 10 after 5. And you're eating your meal by the time you get to the soup and to the main, it would be, let's say, 6:30. So you put it on a clock, and you shut the oven totally shuts off at 6:30. Then you take out your soup, quickly close it so that the heat still stays in there, and then you take out your main a half hour later, and hopefully it stays hot. That would be the best way to do it. The problem with that is that, let's say you have a long time between your soup and your main, then your food will get cool. Not cool, but it won't be nearly as hot. So many people don't like to do that. So the other option that people do is that they take the soup, like we discussed. You can take the soup and you could put some towels and wrap it in towels, and that maybe will maintain it. Okay, everybody has their ways of doing it. Well, the way we do it in my house is that we keep the soup in there and we keep the oven on for a bunch of hours. And what we do is we wait until we know the fire is on in the oven, which is a little tricky with the new ovens. In the old ovens, it was much easier. You had a window and you were able to see the fire on. Okay, Shabbos mode does not help for this at all. Okay, Shabbos mode, many people, and this is a big mistake, and if anybody knows anybody that's just Shabbos mode, does whatever they want, the Star K clearly says it on their website. Shabbos mode does not affect these halachas. These halachas apply to Shabbos mode ovens too. Unfortunately, people think they just put their oven onto Shabbos mode. They can open, close it whenever they want. On Yom Tov, yes. Shabbos, no. Shabbos, all these cases apply. Actually, let me explain this, the way Star K says to do it first, and then explain the other way. So Star K basically says you can leave all your food in the oven, and then you could open the oven door whenever you want, whether the fire is on or off, but then you have to take all the food out at once. You cannot leave the food in. Okay, so they have a leniency, which is that they hold you can open the oven door whenever you want. And the reason why they have no problem with it is because even if you end up turning on the fire, since you're taking all the food out, you could care less about that fire turning on. And since you could care less, it's called a psik ratio, because it's an automatic, but it's loy nichale, you're not interested in it. And it's also a grama, which is on a delay. So with a combination of all these things, therefore the Star case says you can open the door whenever you want, but you got to take out all the food. There's another mahalach, which is the one that I go with, which is the way my father's Rabbi did it, and that's the way his Rabbi said it, right? Which is that you're not allowed to turn the oven. I think I left it on. Okay, so now just focus it on the oven. See, right now, we're going to open, this oven is on 350. Okay, the flame is off. I don't know if you could see it. Right, you see it? The flame is off in this oven. Now I opened the door and nothing happened, right? The flame has not turned on yet. The flame will turn on eventually. So this, by the way, the reason many people say that the old ovens, when you opened it, they immediately turned on. The new ovens don't do that. As you see, we opened it already for 15, 20 seconds and nothing's happened. Right, so the Star K, basically, one second, maybe not. No, now I see that it is on. It is on in there now. Okay, so now the Star K says you have to open it at any time. Right, you open the oven at any time. We don't care what it is. You have to take out all the food and that's it. Okay, the other way to do it is you have to look inside. It's very difficult to do. Or you stand by the oven, you wait for it to click on. Once you hear it click on, you know the fire is on, and then you're allowed to open it because since the fire is already on, which it is now, so then you're not doing anything. All you're doing is going to keep the fire on. The fire would stay on for 10 minutes. So by opening the door, you're going to make the fire stay on for 15 minutes. That's fine. To continue something that's already on is no problem. Changing something is the problem, meaning if the oven would be off, right, the fire would be off, and then you open it, and that would turn it on because the cold air that goes in, then that would be a problem. But once the fire is on, which it is now, I could open it up, and then I have no problem. And then I could leave other food in there because all I did by opening the door was to extend the fire to stay on. Now, what's the next issue? The next issue is if I close the door, then now the heat is staying in there. It's going to eventually shut it off. But it's not going to shut off for at least 5-10 minutes, depending on the temperature of the oven. Since it's not going to shut off for a while and you have no idea when it's going to shut off, then it's no problem. So therefore, again, the Star K, the way the Star K says it, it's meaning each way has, just to clarify, each way has a leniency and a stringency. According to the Star K, you can open it whatever you want, and then you got to take off all the food, take out all the food. According to this other way, which is what I personally do, is you cannot open it unless you know that the fire is on. Right? And when you know that the fire is on, then you're allowed to open it. And continuing the fire to stay on is not an issue. And then you could leave the food in there, the other food in there, and then you close it up, and then you're okay. I noticed a lot of questions with Shabbos mode. Let me just pull them up and see. Shabbos mode oven, again, doesn't allow you to open and close the door. Yes, the Shabbos mode can be used very easily. That's what we said. If you shut it off, The reason why you would want Shabbos mode is because Shabbos mode makes it that no lights turn on and that nothing rings, right? A lot of times you, I totally just forgot what I wanted to say. A lot of times when most ovens, if you don't put it on Shabbos mode, they will beep the whole Shabbos once it shuts off, right? So that's basically why you would want it on Shabbos mode, okay? According to Starkey, the reason why you need to remove it all is because if you don't remove it all, then you're very happy that the fire turned on. Again, there's a difference between a psik ratio that you're happy with and a psik ratio that you're unhappy with. If you leave the food in there and you open the oven door and the oven turned on, then you're very happy with the fire turning on, which is much more problematic. If you take out all the food, you could care less if the oven turns on or off. As a matter of fact, you don't want it to turn on because you'll save money, right? So that's basically, that's the difference in opinion. Again, if you're going to leave the food in there, you want to open them whenever you want, then you got to take all the food out because otherwise you're very happy that the oven turned on. But if you wait for the fire to be on before you open the oven door, then you're doing nothing wrong, right? So then, so that's basically that. Yes, if according to the second method, you can open the oven door as many times as you want, as long as you open it when the fire is on. But sometimes it's very difficult to be able to tell. This oven in particular is very difficult to tell when the oven is on. Sometimes you have to stand there for quite a few minutes, and it's an issue. So if you don't really want to do that, now Yom Tov you could open and close as many times as you want. It's not an issue. And again, the food has to be fully cooked. If the food is not fully cooked, you're not allowed to close the oven door, because by closing the oven door, it's going to end up cooking the food fully. So then it's a problem. Okay, I hope I was clear with this. If I've forgotten anything, so then please text me. I'm not sure what subject we'll continue with. I imagine Boyer would be the next subject. It's a complicated subject. Hopefully we can finish it. I'm not sure what's going to happen, Bezos Hashem, in like a month or so when the clocks change. I don't know exactly what will be. Probably too late at that point. But okay, well, I guess I'll speak to the powers that be and we'll figure something out. Okay, a good tvach and a good year.
And with that, I'm going to wash.